Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Free to Live Trust, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to first tell you why we were set up, which is to rescue and restore victims of modern slavery and their children, and to raise awareness of modern slavery, both at home and abroad. And so I'm going to do this by telling you a little bit about the background to the trust, a little bit about modern slavery, and then I'll go on to tell you about SEMA's project, which is a fundraising part of our project. Now, I'm sure, being based in Linlithgow, you know all about the Amazon Hope project and the Vine Trust, because this was set up by Albert Bogle from Bo'ness. And I'm a retired general practitioner. I was a GP in Kirkcaldy. And one of the highlights of my career was for 2 or 3 years being the volunteer medical director of the Vine Trust. And we took the first medical team from the UK up the Amazon to work on the vessel in 2004. And I'm sure most of you are aware that the base of the ships is at Iquitos, going up these rivers, taking healthcare to the Amazonian Indians. And you can see I was a good bit younger then, but it really was a superb experience. And we took mainly primary healthcare to the villagers, and it was really quite life-changing for me personally, because it wasn't so much through the medical things. We saw lots of horrible medical things, as you would anticipate, through lack of healthcare. But it was working with our partners, Scripture Union Peru at that time, and they did a huge amount of work with Scripture Union in Peru, working with street kids. Now at that time I knew precious little about street kids other than it was a terrible thing, but once you've actually met children, it has a huge impact on you when you realise that your dog at home is better looked after than a street child. So when I retired from the Vine Trust, I wrote a couple of books, and the first book here, called The Dead Don't Hurt Us, is fiction, but it's based on my experiences in the Amazon jungle, and particularly with street kids. The name of the book really was to highlight for young people in particular just how awful the life of the street child is, and really going forward we should be trying to reduce the number of kids scavenging and trying to survive on our streets around the world. After that I became really interested in exploitation of children, because as you know, there's been a lot of talk about and a lot of interest in human trafficking and modern day slavery. And so I went on to write Trampled Shoots, and it's easy to understand why I chose that title, and that's because these are the young shoots of life, and those caught up in human trafficking tend to be under 25. And here's organised crime, the boot of organised crime that squashes these young lives and blights these young lives. The Dead Don't Hurt Us, by the way, the reason I chose that title was because if you look around the world, a lot of the time the street kids will hide in cemeteries. And the reason they hide in cemeteries, excuse me, is because adults abuse them, police abuse them, but they feel safe in the cemeteries because the dead don't hurt them. So moving on from street children to exploitation, I want to now tell you a little bit about how I became involved in the human trafficking work. I'm also a seroptimist. I don't know if you've heard of seroptimists, and that we look out for the rights of women and girls locally, nationally, and internationally. And victims of human trafficking, the vast majority, over 70% in fact, are women and girls. And so I represented Scottish seroptimists raising awareness of human trafficking. So let's just look at this. Well, you need to realise that human trafficking is modern slavery, and the most recent count by global estimates is at about 40 million slaves. Excuse me. And compare that to the Caribbean slave trade, when there was about, they reckoned about 12 million. All absolutely shocking, I know, but the thing about the 40 million is that's just the ones we know about. And you'll see there 71% are female and 25% are children, which I think, shame on us, I think is absolutely shocking. And the different types of exploitation, I'm sure you're aware of it, but if you've got a marble worktop, you know, I wonder if you thought about whose hand hewed the marble. Was it maybe an enslaved family in India? Or cotton t-shirts, jeans, etc. Where does the cotton come from? Is it enslaved families in Uzbekistan? Or that nice cup of chocolate you had last night, whose hands picked the cocoa beans? Was it young boys that had been trafficked in West Africa into the plantations? Sexual exploitation, as you can imagine, is a biggie. And if you look at Europe, 66% of people that are trafficked are for the purposes of sexual exploitation. The one you're maybe not so aware of is that there's around 15 million girls in particular caught up in forced marriage. And, you know, if you're a 12-year-old and you're married off by your family to a 45-year-old, you're, as happens in places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, then you're out of education, you're pregnant very quickly, and you are basically enslaved. I joined a webinar just a couple of weeks back about human trafficking for organs. And as a doctor, I found this particularly disgusting. First came across that when I was in Peru 14, 15 years ago, when we heard from Scripps Union leaders of children being kidnapped and their corneas removed. Not just one cornea, both corneas, therefore rendering them blind. And what I was hearing on the webinar, there are some countries in the world where prisoners are executed. Well, first of all, the prisoners are tissue typed to find out their compatibility. And when there's a need, these prisoners are executed, and hearts, livers, kidneys, etc. Absolutely scandalous. And I have to say, I was totally shocked by the extent of the problem. So that's 21st century medicine for you, just gone awry, which is just shocking beyond belief. But that's the sort of thing that happens. Right, and if you think it's somebody else's problem, these are the most up-to-date figures for Scotland. 512 victims of human trafficking were identified as of May 2020. The 228 are the figures for last year. And again, look at the kids involved here, just shocking. And remember, these are just the ones we know about. These are the ones we know about, and it's happening in our country. And you'll have heard some of the high profile cases that there have been in Glasgow and Govan Hill, etc. Now, I don't know if you're aware that most of the cannabis that's used in our country is actually grown in our country in the United Kingdom. And maybe you're not aware that it's grown in suburbia, and a lot of these houses that are taken over for the cannabis trade, the plants are tended by young Vietnamese boys. And this is still a problem to the extent that last January, January 19, I should say, the Scottish Police Force sent police over to Vietnam to really highlight the issue, because these boys are trafficked through Russia into Scotland. And it still remains a problem. And I don't know if you saw in the press 2 weeks ago, but there are now 2 Vietnamese police officers have come over to try and help stop this trafficking of young boys. And if you remember back to the container ship down in the southeast that was found full of a container lorry, and the tragic loss of young life, and there was several young boys in that, teenage boys, and who knows where they were heading. So it is very much still happening. Now, a report, obviously this has all changed, the Glasgow Airport report, since COVID, but at one point recently, the border police sent home 100 potential victims. These were young women that had come into Scotland. They couldn't say who was going to meet them. The job they said they were coming to didn't exist. And most of these young women were from Eastern Europe, and they were sent back home because the police were convinced they were destined for our sex industry. Now remember, we're a small country of 5 million people, and I think That's a shocking figure. I think if it had been 10 young women, it had been bad enough. But it was 100 women over a 9-month period into one of our airports. And I suspect what's happening now, they are coming up the roads in lorries, in transit vans and things, because it is still going on. So today in Scotland, they could be in our fields. I don't believe the farmers know that some of these young men working or women working in the fruit farms, for example, are trafficked. But what happens is traffickers take over their bank accounts, set up bank accounts for them so that, yeah, they're legitimately getting paid, but just as fast as they're being paid, the money's been taken out. Car washes. Have you ever seen MD Happy in a car wash? Well, I know that Kevin Hyland, who was the Modern Slavery Commissioner, heard him speaking about this and saying that they were really concerned about car washes and about young men being trafficked there. Our nail bars, well, these tend to be women from the Far East who are trained manicurists. And they will come to Britain because they think, yeah, this is a brilliant opportunity, super country, high standards, and we'll be able to send money back to support our families. But in reality, what happens is these girls are brought over here. They're told they owe a whole lot of money, have to work, often in unsafe conditions. And then at night, they can often be bullied into the sex industry in our small country here in Scotland. Similarly with our restaurants, I think this has been tightened up on now, but certainly from Asian countries, people trafficked to work there. And of course, shame on us in our brothels. Young women in particular, but also young boys, lives blighted by the sex industry. So pretty shocking stuff. Hidden in plain sight. So really, I would say if there's anything happening in your area that you're not happy about, you contact the police, let them know what you know, or Crime Stoppers. You don't even have to give your name. And by doing that, you might be the missing link in the chain that allows some young person to go home and be returned to their family. And there's more information on the Modern Slavery Helpline. So there you go. Now, I'm going to now talk about Seamus Project, which is our project in India. Let's have a wee drink first. So this is based in India, Mumbai or Bombay. It's actually in the city of Pune. Is the red light district that we're working, and Bori is the village where our children now are. And in 2014, as I say, I'm one of the co-founders of the Free to Live Trust. This lady in the middle, Avril, she's also co-founder, and she invited me to join her group of girl guide leaders to go with her to India because I wanted to write book number 3, and I wanted to write about the rights of women and girls in India, which, as you know, can be pretty shocking. And so Avril invited me to join her with her group of Girl Guide leaders, which was pretty good of her because I've never been in the guides in my life. But we went to the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts Centre in Pune. And what was good about going there was we didn't go as tourists. And because of that, we were able to visit various charities working with women and girls, and particularly marginalised women and girls and people who have been subject to abuse and various things. But because of our interest in human trafficking, we went to the red light district of Pune. This is the red light district of Pune. Now, Pune has a population 5 to 6 million, I think it is, rapidly rising because of internet technology. And we visited a charity there called Kalpalka. And Kalpalka was set up by a lady called Seema. And according to Seema, this area here, there are somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 women and girls caught up in sexual exploitation. So it's sexual exploitation on an industrial scale, really. And according to Seema, over 90% of these girls are trafficked. And what happens is often a female trafficker will go to remote communities in the countryside, in Bengal or the poorer states, and say to the illiterate farming communities, who just don't know how the world works, who are just living a hand-to-mouth existence and are poor, I've got a job for your daughter. I've got a job in an office for her. and you know what? She'll be able to send money back, and that's a clincher. And these poor, unsuspecting girls are taken across the country to an area where they don't understand the dialect, and these girls are lined up and sold like cattle to the brothel keepers. Now, when we were there, the Kalpalka staff escorted us to a brothel to meet some of these young women. Now, I have to say, at this point, our knowledge of human trafficking was purely theoretical. We'd never met anybody. But we were taken into these brothels and we went up this horrible tenement stair with guys coming down the outside and onto a landing. And we passed queues of guys lined up to go into another brothel. You would think they were going to the barbers. And then we went into a brothel and we met these girls. Now, this was 2014. And I mean, we've got 2 daughters and a son, all grown up now. But when you see these as somebody else's kids, it just shakes your edges. It really does. And we discovered afterwards that this one in the middle here was actually only 14. She'd been given sex hormones to make her look older. Now, we returned to India in 2016, and some of my team wanted to go and visit these girls again, but the Kalpalka staff refused. No, you can't go. You can't go. And the reason being that if these girls were still living, because sometimes they are rented out for the weekend to a village somewhere or a community somewhere, if they're still living, they've probably been sold on to another brothel as a way of renewing the stock. And it's just horrendous, really, absolutely horrendous. Anyway, my friends and I, when we first met these girls, that was emotional enough for us. But then we went back across to the offices of Kalpalka, and up the stairs we were introduced to this group of kids. Now these kids, what shook us rigid was these kids were actually the children of sex workers. And what happens is when a girl gets pregnant in the brothels, she gets to keep her child in the room with her while she works when it's a toddler. But when he gets older, it's put out in the street. And these kids, because they're the children of prostitutes, are actually an underclass of street kid. Can you believe that? An underclass of street kid because they're the kids of sex workers. So Seema realised that these children were hungry, they weren't being educated, they weren't safe at night, and you can imagine what happens to wee girls when they grow up. They don't have to grow up that much, actually. So there's all sorts of abuse goes on. So Seema started using, she fed them and she brought them in and let them sleep on the floor and made sure they went to school. And I have to say, we saw these kids and it was really an emotional roller coaster because you couldn't believe, you look at them and you think, what's the future for these kids, especially wee girls? Anyway, I'm going to introduce you now to Seema. Seema is a remarkable lady. And as I say, when I first met her in 2014, one of the first things she said to me was, I've been working here for 25 years trying to look after the women of the red light district by running sexually transmitted diseases clinics, trying to help them in any way I can. And the reason I do this is because I'm a Christian. And I have to say that was quite a shock to me because India is very much a Hindu country. But I couldn't help but admire this woman. And you'll see later on what I mean by that. She and her husband are an amazing couple, and they do what they do because of their faith. Anyway, Seema told me that her father-in-law had died, and he had left land in the village of Bori, and their great dream was to build a home for these children and get them well out of the red light district. And she says, so I don't know if you could help or not. And well, I'd only been in India about 3 or 4 days, and I thought, well, we need a bit more information than this. So Seema says, well, why don't you come to visit the land that I'm talking about? So my friend Helen and I, we travelled to Bori, and if you've ever been to India, a car journey is an experience in itself. And anyway, we got there safely and we got back, and we discovered that everything was just as she said. Her husband had put in a reservoir, he'd put in market gardening, these are pomegranates, and he was trying to raise an income to support a children's home. And they showed us the plot of land that they wanted to build this home on. Now this is 2014, and well, I have to say, by the end of our 3 weeks in India, we were just emotionally wrung out, and we didn't want to make any big decisions. But after a few weeks, our group got together again and thought, well, we've got two choices, haven't we? We either pretend we never saw these kids and just carry on as normal and look the other way, or we do something about it. So we decided that we would set up the Free to Live Trust and we would fundraise. And within 2 years, the people of Scotland built this home for these children. And we fundraised across Scotland, and it's a super place, and I'll show you more up-to-date photograph further through. And you see, children have got the lovely facilities. And the village of Borey is very much a rural village, and it's where Shirish's father had grown up. I'll tell you more about him in a minute. And there's our kids. This again would be about 2016. This would be in the main part there. And they go to the local school. And the story about Shirish's father, he was the Reverend Harry Wagmode, and he grew up in Borey, the village of Borey, and his parents were Hindu, but his father converted to Christianity, and they were persecuted. And Harry, his name was Harry Wagmode, he went to school at Baramati, which is a local county town. It was run by Australian missionaries. And he then went to Wilson College in Mumbai, which at that time was run by the Church of Scotland. And then he went to Australia and became a minister. And he came back and he set up this secondary school here in Borey. And the idea was that the rural kids would get an education and an opportunity to go further. And here are our partners, the Reverend Harry Wagmode Foundation. This is my husband and I in 2017, I think it was, meeting the board. And each time we go out, we try and meet the board of the charity that we work with to make sure things are progressing. Now, I want to tell you about this little girl. She's a lot older now, but probably about 3 years ago now, what's this? No, maybe 2 years ago now, back in the red light district, one of the sex workers came to Seema and she said, one of the madams has got a little girl that she's using. And as far as Seema is concerned, she thought she'd got rid of all made sure there was no children being abused. And it is illegal in India, but when did that ever matter? Anyway, Seema went to the brothel, to the madam, and demanded over, give me this little girl. I hear you've got a little girl. And the madam completely denied it. No, definitely not. Don't have a little girl. And for some reason in the altercation, things fell silent. And Seema and her colleague Sarika were there, heard a noise coming from a hatch in the ceiling. And Sarika climbed up and found this little darling hidden underneath mattresses. She's now in our home and she's thriving. But she'd been trafficked from Nepal. And Nepal is a real source for trafficking victims because of its poverty. Abject poverty in many of the areas of Nepal, and children are trafficked. It's just shocking. Anyway, this wee girl is doing well now. Yeah, we have. We're very, very delighted to have been selected as one of the Guild partners in 2018, and so we, up until COVID, were visiting guilds all across Scotland, telling them about our work and what we do. And from the funds raised from the Guild, we aim to start a lunch programme, and this was very successful. It started, I think, 2018, 19, and we were feeding up to 50 or 60 kids, and to increase the number of children at Borey. And of course, we also want to reach out to some of the sex workers, and I'll come on to that in a minute, because they're just kids themselves. It's just shocking. And also to make sure that any youngster that went through our school had some training so that they could support themselves when in adult life. So I'll just let you know the developments that have happened since 2018. At Christmas time, on Christmas Eve on 2017, the home had been open for about a year. Seema was inspected by the government, who said this is one of the best homes we have in the whole area. But the state government have passed a new law which says you cannot have boys and girls under the same roof. You will have to build a boys' home. Well, you can imagine we were a bit distraught and thought, dearie me, we'll have to raise more funds. But we did. And again, the people of Scotland, within 18 months, help us build the boys' wing. And as you'll see, it's just as well we did. So that all happened, again, thanks to people of Scotland. Now, these were some of the kids that were being fed, thanks to the Guild project back in the red light district. And I remember saying to Seema, I says, oh, how many street kids is there still there? Thinking that, well, we've got a fair number at Borey. And she says, oh, there's over 100. And it's hard to imagine, isn't it? 100 kids, not sure where the next meal's coming from or who's going to abuse them. Anyway, this feeding programme was going really well until COVID, as you will see. I'll move on to what happened from March. And if you've been following the news, you will realise that the Premier Modi, he closed down India in 4 hours. And what happened was that all the daily wagers, which would be your housekeepers, your gardeners, some of your factory workers, were suddenly without work. Millions of people in India with no income, and no income equals no food. So there was huge problems in India, and the people headed for home. Which of course was not the best answer to a pandemic with people on the move, as you know. But of course, what happened was the police went into the red light district and closed it down completely. And so these women were left without food, and their children were left without food. And this is them at Kyle Palco offices coming to Seema to see if she could help. And I just want to show you, see how young that kid is there? Absolutely desperate. And Seema told us actually that a 21-year-old had died in the red light district. She said from starvation, but I suspect it must have been something else as well, just sheer lack of healthcare of any form, I would think. And so Seema and her team got together and they raised funds, and here they are distributing food to the ladies of the red light district. And they still do this, feeding them, supporting them. And of course, the children. And she was feeding the children. But then after a couple of months, Seema got permission from the government to move some of the kids out to Borey. And this is the first batch. And fortunately, because we had the boys' home, she was able to quarantine them. And in actual fact, she's now got somewhere between 50 and 60 kids in this home, doubling the number that were there. And 2 of the kids, actually, the police had got in touch with her, I think, and told her that there was a brother and sister abandoned at Pune railway station. So she collected them. And these were just young kids. So they're now safe. And also she picked up some kids from another red light district. So she's doing amazing work. And this is the home now. And you can see we need more staff. And it's come on. This is a recent photograph. And the boys' home is at the back here. This is the boys' home here, all in the same site, but different buildings. And you can see meal times are a busy place. And this is the Reverend Harry. The charity is named after him. And with the funds that we've been able to provide, this is Krishna. He is the new housemaster for the boys, and he's doing a terrific job. He also, because all the schools are still closed, and they've been teaching the children. Here he is teaching them. They also have some cattle, and there was a calf born recently, and the cattle produce the milk for the children. Now I want to come on now to the rescuing of the women. This next picture, I can hardly believe this happened, but that is me there, and this is January 2019, and we were visiting, and we visited Kyle Palka in Pune's red light district. And Seema says, the police commissioner, this chap here, is holding a conference upstairs with the madams. I want you to go up and speak to the madams. And I have to say, well, I couldn't think of anything civil to say to the madams, actually. But I had to find something, because there's 50 women in here, And each of these 50 women are responsible for 7 to 10 young women that they control, that they force into the sex industry. And what this police commissioner was saying to them was, I'm the new commissioner, I'm going to look after you, I'll make sure no other madams come into this area, and the only thing you have to do is make sure you finish work at 11 o'clock at night. And then Seema launched into him and said, the only reason you're saying that is so your men can come at night. And it's just a surreal moment. I basically said, the people of Scotland have reached out to the children on the street and are helping them. But you just think, of course, some of these women will have been prostitutes themselves. Other of them are just astute businesswomen. But of course, they're just part of a chain, aren't they? Because there'll be businessmen, politicians, right the way up the train, because the sex industry in India is huge. There's millions caught up in it and millions of pounds caught up in it. Anyway, here's a couple of girls that Seema has rescued. This young lady, she was travelled to Pune to marry a young man. He didn't like her, so he sold her into the brothels. And she's now been rescued by Seema. This woman was a bit older and from another city, and the family hit in hard times, so hubby brought her to the brothels and sold her. And this young woman actually, she's wasn't in the brothels very long, and she's now chief cook in Bori. And it's a success story. And over the COVID times, Seema's rescued. There's actually 4 girls here that have been rescued by Seema, and these guys are counsellors and trying to help them. And because Bori's so busy now, because there's nearly 60 kids, they're now in a place of safety in Pune, and I believe they're learning a trade. They're making jewellery, and they hope to be able to sell that. This is Shirish, by this is Seema's husband. And one of our young women was married, and this was a wedding that was held in June. So a new life. This is a Christian marriage, and a new life, and which is just wonderful to see. And this other girl, she it's Hindu, and it was a Hindu wedding, and all the leaders of Bori village have shown up, as have some of our children, because this is just outside our children's home. So Seema does her very best to help the girls. Previously, she's shown me photographs of a young woman she rescued from the sex industry who went on to train as a hairdresser and was opening up her new business. And she's got all sorts of opportunities for them. She wants to train them as bakers or give them a skill to get them well away from those who would abuse them. So that's me at the end now, and as you can see here, times are difficult with COVID, and we've a lot of mouths to feed. So if anybody feels they could help us in any way, that would be terrific. So thank you very much for listening. And if you've got any questions, I'll try and answer them for you.